Disclaimer: it's inspired by reality, shaped by imagination.
What happens when Rowan Atkinson, the quiet genius behind Mr. Bean and Blackadder, sits across from Joy Behar on The View, and the topic isn't comedy at all, but government control over social media? The show started like any other episode, with laughter, chatter, and Whoopi Goldberg keeping things light. But once the conversation turned to whether the government should tighten its grip on social media, the tone changed fast. Rowan, known for his sharp intellect and free speech advocacy, argued that more regulation would destroy the open exchange of ideas that comedy and democracy depend on. Joy Behar, never one to hold back, fired back that unregulated platforms had already turned into breeding grounds for lies, hate, and division. The clash that followed was a collision of philosophies: freedom versus safety, truth versus control. The audience watched in stunned silence as the man who made millions laugh used calm logic to dismantle the idea of government overreach, while Joy pushed back with real emotion about the harm social media has done to people she knows. By the end, it wasn't just about politics or platforms. It was about what kind of world we want to live in and who gets to decide what's safe to say. And when Rowan finally stood up and walked off the set, he left behind one of the most unforgettable moments The View had ever seen.
The morning sunlight filtered through The View's bright studio windows as the familiar theme music faded. Whoopi Goldberg, ever the calm anchor of chaos, smiled toward the camera. "All right, everyone, we've got a real treat today. A man whose characters have made the whole world laugh. But don't let that quiet demeanor fool you. He's one of the sharpest minds in British comedy. Please welcome Rowan Atkinson." The audience cheered warmly as Rowan stepped onto the stage in his usual reserved fashion, hands folded, polite smile, that subtle awkwardness that somehow made him even more endearing. He took a seat beside Joy Behar, who clapped lightly and leaned toward him with a grin. "Rowan, I have to say, it's kind of surreal seeing you here talking instead of miming. You've been the voice of silence for decades." Rowan smiled. "Yes, though ironically, I've found that silence often communicates more truth than words, especially online these days." That earned a few chuckles from the crowd. Whoopi nodded approvingly. And that's actually the perfect segue to today's topic: should the government regulate social media more strictly? The tone in the room shifted slightly, the applause fading into a curious hush. Sonny Hostin jumped in first. "It's not really a question of if, but how. We've seen social media become a weapon, used for harassment, misinformation, and sometimes even violence. The government has to step in to protect people." Rowan clasped his hands, listening intently. "I understand the concern," he said, in his measured British tone. "But when governments begin deciding what can or can't be said, you've already crossed into dangerous territory. History has never looked kindly on censorship disguised as protection." Joy leaned forward. "But Rowan, come on. This isn't about censorship. It's about accountability. We have laws for public behavior, don't we? Why should online behavior be exempt?" Rowan turned slightly toward her. "Because the Internet, for all its flaws, is still the last open square for free discussion. If we regulate it heavily, we hand over the keys to truth and comedy to bureaucrats, and bureaucrats have never been known for their sense of humor." That drew a few laughs from the audience, but Joy didn't join in. "So you're okay with people spreading hate speech or conspiracy theories unchecked?" Rowan shook his head. "No, I'm not okay with it. But I'm even less okay with giving power to a system that can label anything it dislikes as harmful. Once you open that door, it never closes." Anna Navarro interjected, her tone brisk. "But Rowan, you're talking about ideals. In the real world, people are dying because of online lies. Elections are being manipulated. Don't we have a responsibility to step in?" Rowan's voice softened, but remained firm. "Anna, we do have a responsibility to educate, to debate, to challenge falsehoods with facts, not to silence them with authority. The moment we outsource truth to regulators, we lose the habit of thinking for ourselves." Whoopi, sensing the weight of the exchange, leaned back slightly. "You're saying the cure might be worse than the disease?" "Exactly," Rowan replied. The same tools created to suppress hate can be used to suppress humor, satire, dissent, anything that makes those in power uncomfortable. Joy crossed her arms. But you've got to admit, social media has gotten out of control. It's destroying mental health, polarizing the country. Don't you think some kind of oversight is better than this chaos? Rowan paused, considering. I agree that it's chaos, but human communication is chaotic. That's how ideas evolve. Comedy itself thrives in that chaos. Once you start regulating speech for safety, you stop trusting people to handle offense and start training them to fear it. The audience murmured in thought. A few claps broke through the silence. Sunny spoke again, gently this time. So you'd rather risk harm than impose order? Rowan looked at her and said, I'd rather risk discomfort than live in a world where jokes require government approval. That line hit hard. The studio went quiet for a moment before a wave of applause rose from parts of the audience. Joy smiled tightly, shaking her head. You really believe comedy should be immune from regulation? Not immune, but free, because comedy is where we test truth. Once you regulate laughter, you regulate thought. Whoopi exhaled, smiling faintly. You know, that's a heavy idea for morning television. Rowan gave a small grin. Then perhaps we're finally talking about something important. The crowd laughed, breaking the tension a little, but the energy had shifted. This wasn't a light-hearted celebrity interview anymore. This was the start of something deeper, a clash not between comedian and host, but between freedom and control. And as the camera zoomed in on the table, Joy Behar's expression said it all. She wasn't backing down, and neither was Rowan Atkinson. The real argument was just beginning.
The next segment began with a close-up on Joy Behar's face. The smile was still there, but it was tighter now, less friendly, more ready for battle. Across from her, Rowan Atkinson sat calm and still, fingers lightly resting on the edge of the table, like a man who knew storms came and went, but reason stayed. Whoopi Goldberg tried to reset the mood. All right, folks, she said, her voice steady. Before the break, we were talking about the role government should or shouldn't play in regulating social media. Rowan thinks we're on a slippery slope. Joy thinks we're already sliding. Let's pick it back up. Joy jumped right in. Here's the problem, Rowan, she said, leaning forward. You're talking about freedom like it's this sacred, untouchable thing. But freedom without responsibility is chaos. If people can lie, manipulate, and bully online without consequences, that's not freedom, it's anarchy. Rowan tilted his head slightly. And yet, Joy, every government in history that promised to protect people by controlling speech eventually decided it also had to protect itself from criticism. That's not theory, that's history. The audience hummed with energy, half nodding in agreement, half shifting uncomfortably. Ana Navarro joined in. But Rowan, this isn't 1930s Germany or the Soviet Union. We're talking about stopping hate groups, foreign propaganda, people literally using social media to recruit extremists. That's not harmless speech. That's danger. Rowan's tone stayed patient, almost professorial. And I'm not saying those things shouldn't be challenged, Ana. But the question is, who decides what qualifies as danger? Because once the power to define that lies in one pair of hands, be it a government or a corporation, you've created a truth monopoly. Sunny Haston nodded thoughtfully. But we already regulate things in society, she countered. We have laws against false advertising, defamation, incitement. Why should online platforms be different? Rowan gave a small, rueful smile. Because they aren't newspapers or television channels. They're modern public squares, messy, loud, and unpredictable, yes, but alive. When the government starts moderating public squares, democracy starts suffocating quietly. Whoopi raised an eyebrow. So what's the answer, Rowan? Just let everyone say whatever they want? Not quite, Rowan replied. We draw lines where speech directly incites violence or harm. Beyond that,
People must learn to counter bad ideas with better ones, not with bans. You don't strengthen society by shielding it from disagreement." Joy let out a sharp laugh. "That sounds great in theory, but tell that to families who've lost loved ones to conspiracy nonsense online, or to kids bullied to death because someone thought their free speech was more important than basic decency." Rowan's expression softened. "And I grieve for those families," he said quietly. "But censorship wouldn't have saved them. Education, empathy, and accountability might have. Regulating speech doesn't eliminate cruelty. It just hides it where we can't see it." The room went silent for a few seconds. Then Joy leaned back, her tone cutting again. "You sound like you trust humanity a little too much." Rowan smiled faintly. "And you sound like you've given up on it." That drew gasps from the audience, and even a few scattered claps. Joy's eyes widened, not in anger, but in shock at how calmly he had said it. Whoopi tried to steady the tension. "Okay, let's all breathe for a second," she said, her voice steady. "We're talking about balance here. Joy thinks we need a referee. Rowan thinks we need thicker skin." Rowan nodded slightly. "I'm not against moderation, Whoopi. I'm against dependence. When people stop defending their right to speak because someone else promises to do it for them, they lose more than their voice. They lose the habit of thinking freely." Anna leaned in again. "But you can't ignore the power of these platforms, Rowan. Algorithms are designed to reward outrage. That's not free expression, it's manipulation. Maybe the government should step in to make them less toxic." Rowan thought for a moment. "Algorithms are mirrors. They show us what we choose to click on. We made them powerful by feeding them attention. The problem isn't the technology, it's our appetite for outrage." Whoopi gave a slow nod. "That's fair," she said, "but you can't deny these companies play a massive role in shaping how people think. They're practically governments of their own now." "Exactly. So why give one government the power to control another? Why trade Silicon Valley's bias for Washington's bias?" Joy shook her head. "Because at least the government is accountable. Tech CEOs aren't elected." Rowan's tone sharpened just slightly. "And yet politicians aren't saints either, Joy. Give them control of speech, and the first thing they'll regulate is criticism of themselves. That's not accountability. That's survival instinct." The audience clapped again, louder this time. Joy exhaled and looked toward Whoopi, who gave a small shrug that said, "Go on if you dare." Joy smirked. "You know, Rowan, for a guy who made his fortune pretending to be silent, you sure have a lot to say." The crowd laughed, easing the tension slightly. Rowan grinned. "Silence," he said, "is sometimes the only defense against nonsense." The laughter turned into applause. But behind the humor, everyone could feel it. The real heart of the clash wasn't about social media anymore. It was about trust. Trust in people versus trust in power. As the camera zoomed out for the commercial break, the audience buzzed with anticipation. Rowan Atkinson had made his stand for free speech. Joy Behar wasn't finished challenging it. The next round would go beyond arguments and statistics. It would dig into something deeper. The emotional cost of living in a world where every word can be weaponized and silence can speak louder than truth.
The studio lights seemed harsher than before, almost glaring down like spotlights in an interrogation room. Joy leaned forward, a sharp grin playing at her lips. "Rowan, you keep talking about humor and self-restraint as if the internet is some kind of polite tea party. It's not. It's chaos. If we don't put guardrails up, people get hurt." Rowan's voice stayed calm, but his words had an edge. "And if we do put too many up, Joy, we'll strangle free speech until it's gasping for air. You can't have a society that's both controlled and free. One of those words eventually stops."
The studio lights seemed harsher than before, almost glaring down like spotlights in an interrogation room. Joy leaned forward, a sharp grin playing at her lips. Rowan, you keep talking about humor and self-restraint as if the internet is some kind of polite tea party. It's not. It's chaos. If we don't put guardrails up, people get hurt. Rowan's voice stayed calm, but his words had an edge. And if we do put too many up, Joy, we'll strangle free speech until it's gasping for air. You can't have a society that's both controlled and free. One of those words eventually stops meaning anything. Whoopi jumped in. But you're talking about balance, right? Nobody's saying delete free speech. Just make sure people aren't spreading hate or lies. Rowan turned to her. But who decides what counts as hate or lies, Whoopi? A committee? A few politicians? The same ones who can't agree on what day it is? Laughter rippled through part of the audience, but the rest sat quiet, sensing the tension thickening. Joy leaned closer, her tone dropping low, almost a challenge. That's easy for you to say, Rowan. You're a comedian. You don't see the kind of harassment public figures, especially women, get online every day. Rowan nodded slowly. You're right. I haven't lived that experience. But censorship isn't the cure. It's a curtain. It hides the sickness, but doesn't heal it. The real answer is education and accountability, not silencing voices. Joy's eyes narrowed. So you just let people run wild, spread lies about elections, attack minorities, harass children. You call that accountability? Rowan's voice rose slightly, but he stayed measured. I call that responsibility, and it starts with us, not the government. Once you give bureaucrats the power to decide what's acceptable speech, you'll never get that power back, ever. The crowd reacted with a wave of mixed applause and murmurs. Sonny Hostin, seated to Joy's right, jumped in. But Rowan, the government already regulates industries for safety, food, medicine, cars. Why should social media be any different? It's hurting people too. He turned to her, his brow furrowed. Because this isn't about cars or medicine, Sonny. This is about thought, about words. Once you regulate that, you're not protecting people, you're controlling them. Ana Navarro shook her head, exhaling sharply. That sounds dramatic, Rowan. Nobody's trying to control anyone's mind. We just want to stop the damage being done. Rowan looked genuinely frustrated now. Ana, that's exactly how it always starts. Good intentions. But power expands. It never contracts. You start by banning hate speech, then it becomes political speech, and before long, dissent itself is seen as dangerous. Joy leaned back in her chair, folding her arms. So you'd rather let corporations run the show than let the government set rules to protect the people? I'd rather let people choose. If you don't like what's on a platform, don't use it. Teach your kids how to navigate it. We don't need a nanny state policing what we can and can't say. The room buzzed with divided reactions. Joy's face tightened. That's easy for you to say, Rowan, when you're not the target, when you're not the one getting hundreds of death threats because someone posted your address online. Rowan's tone softened, and for a moment his usual calm humor flickered through. Joy, I don't doubt that's awful. No one deserves that. But do you really think another law will make a cruel person kind? We're trying to legislate morality through keyboards. The silence that followed hung heavy. Even Whoopi looked uneasy. Joy broke it with a cold, clipped tone. So what's your solution then? Sit back and hope people magically get better? Rowan looked around the table, then to the audience. No. We teach, we parent, we lead by example. We remember that the same freedom that lets someone offend you also lets you speak your truth. You can't separate the two. The audience clapped, some out of conviction, others out of sheer tension release. Joy forced a tight smile. Well, maybe in your perfect British world that works, but here people die from online lies. Maybe you should think about that before defending total freedom. Rowan's expression shifted. The calm veneer cracked just slightly. Freedom isn't perfect, Joy. It's messy, it's loud, but it's the only thing that lets progress happen.
If you start trimming it for safety, you'll wake up one day and realize there's nothing left to protect." The applause this time was louder. Even a few crew members near the cameras exchanged glances. Joy, visibly irritated, leaned forward again. "So you're saying if someone's being destroyed online, that's just the price of freedom?" Rowan looked right at her. "I'm saying freedom isn't free. It's uncomfortable, and it demands resilience, not regulation." Whoopi tried to step in, sensing the heat. "All right, let's take a breath here." But Joy wasn't backing down. "No, I want him to answer that, Whoopi, because it sounds like he's defending bullies." Rowan's voice lowered to almost a whisper, but every word carried. "And you sound like you're defending control." That line hit the air like a lightning bolt. The audience gasped, half applauding, half murmuring. The tension was electric now, every face on set locked in place. Joy's face vanished. "You know, Rowan, maybe your brand of comedy belongs in the past." He blinked slowly. "Maybe your version of progress does too." A pause, heavy, unmoving. The air between them crackled with something raw and unfiltered. The camera caught Joy's eyes flicking toward the control booth, signaling to cut to commercial, but the damage was done. The emotional flashpoint had arrived.
When the show returned from commercial, the tension was still hanging in the air like static. The audience could sense it. Nobody was laughing anymore. Even Whoopi looked uneasy as she tried to steer things back to neutral ground. "So, we're talking about social media regulation, not a boxing match, right?" But Rowan didn't smile. He sat with his hands folded, expression unreadable. "I think we are talking about something much deeper, Whoopi. We're talking about who gets to decide what truth is." Joy exhaled, visibly irritated. "Rowan, you keep saying that as if there's some grand conspiracy to silence people. We're talking about stopping harm, stopping lies that literally ruin lives." Rowan nodded once, slowly. "And I'm saying the cure can't be worse than the disease." The audience murmured, half applause, half discomfort. Joy turned toward him sharply. "You're acting like any kind of rule is a prison. That's not freedom, that's chaos. You can't just let people post whatever they want without consequences. And you can't trust power without limits. You think the government will stop at fake news? They'll move on to jokes, to opinions, to anything inconvenient. Don't be ridiculous. Nobody's coming for your jokes." He raised an eyebrow. "Aren't they? I've seen comedians canceled for things they said 20 years ago. You don't see that as a warning?" Joy leaned forward, her voice rising. "What I see are people finally being held accountable. The internet gave everyone a microphone, Rowan. Maybe some people shouldn't have one." That line hit the crowd like a slap. A few gasps, a few claps, but mostly silence. Rowan stared at her, stunned. "You really believe that? That some people don't deserve a voice?" Joy didn't flinch. "If their words cause harm, yes." Rowan sat back in his chair, eyes narrowing. "That's not democracy, Joy. That's gatekeeping disguised as virtue." Whoopi tried to intervene again. Okay, let's take a breath." But it was too late. Rowan stood up. His microphone cord tugged slightly, and one of the producers off stage froze. The audience stirred, sensing what was about to happen. "I came here to talk about ideas," Rowan said, his voice calm but laced with quiet anger. "Not to be told that some people don't deserve to speak. That's exactly the mindset that ruins creativity and freedom with it." Joy tried to interject, but he continued, his tone now almost sorrowful. "We can't keep shouting about tolerance while silencing the voices we dislike. That's hypocrisy, dressed up as progress." He looked out at the audience, then back at Joy. "I've made a career out of showing how absurd people can be, but this isn't comedy anymore. It's control pretending to care." And with that, Rowan unhooked his microphone and placed it on the table. "Maybe when we can talk again, without fear of being shut down, I'll come back.
He turned, gave a brief nod to Whoopi, and walked off the set. The crowd erupted, some cheering, others booing. Joy sat frozen for a moment, then forced a half-smile and muttered, "Well, that's one way to end a conversation." But the look in her eyes said something entirely different, something uncertain. For the first time all morning, she didn't seem so sure she'd won.
As the cameras cut to commercial, the studio fell into an uneasy quiet. The applause had stopped, replaced by murmurs that rippled through the audience. Joy sat back, arms crossed, staring at the empty chair where Rowan Atkinson had been. The producers whispered frantically in her earpiece, but she barely listened. When the show returned, Joy forced a laugh, though her voice trembled slightly. "Well, folks, that's live television for you. Sometimes our guests take the discussion a bit too seriously." Whoopi glanced at her, then back to the audience. "Or maybe," she said gently, "sometimes we need to take these things seriously. It's not an easy topic. There's a lot at stake. Freedom, truth, responsibility." The audience nodded, subdued now. Anna Navarro chimed in carefully. "Look, I get where Rowan was coming from. Nobody wants censorship, but we can't ignore what social media has become, this giant machine that spreads lies faster than the truth can keep up." Joy sighed. "I get it, Anna. I just think if we don't regulate it, people get hurt. It's that simple." Whoopi tilted her head. "But if we regulate it too much, people lose their voices." That's what he was saying. Maybe the problem isn't who talks, but how we listen. That line hung in the air. Even Joy went quiet for a moment. The producers rolled a highlight clip of the debate, showing Rowan's calm but cutting remarks, the tension in Joy's face, and his quiet walk-off. Watching it back, something shifted. The audience saw not just a clash of opinions, but a reflection of a country arguing with itself. When the segment ended, Joy looked at the camera, her tone softer than before. "Rowan and I may not agree, but he's right about one thing. We're losing the art of conversation. Maybe that's what social media has done to us. It's made shouting easier than listening." Whoopi gave a small nod. "That's worth remembering." The credits rolled, the audience clapped politely, and the lights dimmed. But off-camera, the mood lingered. Joy stayed in her chair, thoughtful, while a stagehand retrieved Rowan's microphone from the table. Later that night, clips from the confrontation spread across every platform. #RowanWalksOff started trending within the hour. Some called him a hero for standing up for free speech. Others said he'd missed the point entirely. But what everyone agreed on was that The View hadn't felt that raw, that real in a long time. And somewhere in the noise of arguments and retweets, Rowan's final words echoed back. "Maybe when we can talk again, without fear of being shut down, I'll come back." It was the kind of moment television rarely gets anymore, unscripted, honest, and impossible to forget.